Disrespect is not merely a minor affront, it is a fracture in the architecture of influence, a fissure in the perception of authority that, if left unchecked, metastasizes into a systemic collapse of control. To tolerate it is to surrender dominion over your own environment, to grant others silent permission to erode the walls that protect your ego and your value. Those who walk freely among you, daring to violate boundaries, are not innocent or unaware. They are predators of perception, testing, probing, and mapping the weaknesses they intend to exploit. Each slight, each whispered dismissal, is a calculated measurement of your threshold, your capacity to assert dominance, and the fragility of your self-command. The mind, when confronted with disrespect, reacts in a spectrum of responses that reveal its true hierarchy: fear, anger, avoidance, rationalization. All of these are instruments of surrender. To tolerate disrespect is to participate in your own erosion, a voluntary abdication of power that masquerades as patience or composure. Every human interaction is a battlefield of perception, the one who frames reality, who calibrates the boundaries of value and consequence, dictates the narrative. The moment you allow disrespect to pass unchallenged, you concede the battlefield. Others perceive weakness where none is intended, interpreting silence not as strategy but as acceptance, and in that space, contempt begins to flourish. Consider the subtle architecture of disrespect: the I role that questions competence, the interruption that negates authority, the insincere compliment that masks condescension. Each is a vector of destabilization, a psychological probe designed to reveal the seams of control. The danger lies not in overt aggression, but in these quiet invasions, in the erosion of perception that occurs when you fail to act with strategic precision. Human beings are not guided by fairness or morality, they are guided by signals of power. If your presence communicates tolerance for diminishment, your value is no longer intrinsic. It is conditional, contingent upon others' whims. Strategically, one must recognize that these behaviors are not isolated incidents, they are symptoms of a deeper social calculus. To address disrespect is not to react impulsively or emotionally. It is to reclaim the narrative, to reassert the framework of dominance without the crutch of moral justification. Every tolerated slight chips away at the psychological economy of your influence, draining authority from your interactions and redistributing it to those willing to exploit your passivity. Ego is not a fragile vanity, it is the lens through which power is measured. Disrespect pierces this lens and leaves the world viewing a distorted reflection, one of vulnerability, instability, and malleable identity. The mind can adapt, but only if the individual enforces boundaries with deliberate, unyielding consistency. There is no room for ambiguity. Every tolerated disrespectful behavior seeds future incursions, cultivating obsession, frustration, and even envy in those who perceive opportunity where there should be none. They will test limits, escalating in frequency and intensity until a decisive intervention occurs. To intervene is not to punish, it is to restore equilibrium, to realign perception with the truth of your authority. Strategic absence, calibrated silence, controlled confrontation, these are the tools through which one neutralizes threats to dominance without compromising self-mastery. In the theater of human behavior, respect is earned, demanded, and defended. It is not given as a courtesy, nor does it arrive through politeness. Those who violate it are testing the boundaries of your identity and measuring your willingness to protect it. There is a psychological elegance to this system. Every act of tolerance invites escalation. Every act of decisiveness rewrites the power matrix in your favor. Disrespect, when unchecked, becomes a contagion. When addressed with precision, it becomes an instrument of influence, a lens through which the world recalibrates its perception of you. This is the calculus of control: to never tolerate, to always observe, to strategically dismantle the behaviors that seek to diminish you. The mind that understands this does not rage or plead. It calculates, it absorbs, it projects authority with unshakable composure. And in doing so, it converts every attempted slight into a testament of psychological mastery, a demonstration of dominance so subtle, so complete, that those who attempted to undermine you will recognize their own fragility before the cold, unyielding framework of your presence. Now, we will dissect each behavior in its own stage, An anatomy of disrespect, layer by layer, revealing the corrosive effects on mind and perception, and the methods through which dominance can be restored and absolute authority re-established. The first form of disrespect is rarely overt. It arrives like a shadow at the edge of perception, a cutting remark masked as humor, an intentional oversight, a look that questions competence without words. Its power lies in its subtlety, small enough to be dismissed by the untrained mind, precise enough to erode confidence over time. This is the stage where the mind begins its silent negotiation with reality, attempting to rationalize slights that are, in truth, deliberate assaults on identity. Observe carefully. Those who employ these tactics are testing boundaries, mapping the elasticity of your authority. Their goal is not immediate conquest, but slow infiltration, the cultivation of doubt and distraction. Each tolerated incident becomes a reference point, a psychological foothold from which they can escalate. The human ego, when confronted with ambiguity, compensates with internal explanations, excuses, rationalizations, and self-reassurances. This is fertile ground for manipulation, for the subtle redirection of respect away from its rightful owner. At this stage, mastery is measured by observation and restraint. Do not react impulsively. Let the slight register fully, noting its intention and its potential trajectory. Silence here is not submission, it is calibration. The mind that perceives the first signs of undermining can trace its vector, anticipate the escalation, and plan a strategic response that reshapes perception before dominance is challenged openly. Absence of immediate reaction does not mean weakness. It means control, the psychological patience to act at the precise moment when impact is maximal and resistance minimal. Strategically, this is also the stage where influence begins to solidify internally. Each unchecked disrespect accumulates like a hidden debt, but each deliberate acknowledgement, each subtle realignment of boundaries, communicates the architecture of authority. Those who test limits are not merely seeking disruption, they are evaluating strength. The moment they sense it, the pattern shifts. Respect becomes not a negotiable commodity, but a structured consequence of behavior. This is the threshold where observation transforms into strategy. Understanding the subtleties of early disrespect allows one to convert potential erosion into psychological advantage, transforming the predator into a measured opponent whose moves are anticipated and whose influence is contained within a framework you alone control. The mind that masters this stage begins the first act of silent dominance, a calculated preparation for confrontation, and the reassertion of authority with surgical precision. Once disrespect penetrates subtly, it begins its work on the internal architecture of self. Ego, the lens through which power is measured, is not impervious. It bends, fractures, and twists under repeated, calculated assaults. The individual who tolerates early slights feels the first tremors of instability, hesitation in decisions, second, guessing of authority, and the quiet discomfort of diminished presence. This is not external chaos, it is the mind policing itself, internalizing disrespect as a threat to identity. Here, the psychological battle is internal. You are both the observer and the observed, tracking the subtle shifts in perception that others attempt to induce. The human mind reacts predictably to repeated undermining. Doubt blooms, confidence contracts, and what was once assertive becomes tentative. Disrespect at this stage exploits the economy of emotion, draining resilience without a single overt confrontation. It is surgical, invisible, and precise. Those who understand the mechanism of ego erosion know that to strike at confidence is to control outcomes without appearing dominant, to weaponize absence and silence against the unguarded self. Yet this erosion also contains a signal, a marker of opportunity. The mind that recognizes its own weakening can intercept the trajectory of influence before it becomes irreversible. Strategic recalibration is required. Boundaries must be enforced with consistency, perception reshaped through subtle assertion, and the architecture of authority re-established. The predator who tests your limits does so in expectation of hesitation, denying them that hesitation converts their aggression into predictability. Symbolically, the erosion of ego is a slow corrosion of the mind's fortress. Each tolerated slight is a crack, but each decisive act of reclamation is mortar, rebuilding the walls with greater precision. The moment of awareness, recognizing the internalized effects of disrespect, is also the moment of strategic empowerment. One does not react with anger, one reconstructs authority, reinforcing perception with controlled presence, calibrated action, and the quiet inevitability of dominance. This stage is critical. The ego's fracture is both a vulnerability and a tool. Recognizing the subtle undermining of self allows for anticipation, manipulation of perception, and the transformation of threat into psychological leverage. The mind that masters this stage begins to convert internal instability into external control, turning the corrosive influence of disrespect into the foundation of deliberate, unshakable authority. When disrespect persists, it transforms from a subtle intrusion into a fixation, a psychological echo that reverberates through every thought, every hesitation. The mind begins to obsess, replaying the slight, analyzing intention, and projecting potential consequences with ruthless precision. This is the stage where fear manifests, not of the person, but of vulnerability, the unsettling recognition that one's authority is being measured, tested, and, if uncorrected, diminished. Fear here is not irrational, it is strategic, a signal that the mind must act or suffer erosion of influence. Obsession at this level is a double-edged blade. It exposes internal weaknesses while simultaneously revealing opportunities. Those who fail succumb to endless mental loops, allowing disrespect to dictate the rhythm of thought and behavior. Their attention becomes a currency spent on others' perceptions, while their presence, once commanding, diminishes into anxiety and overcompensation. The predator thrives in this imbalance, sensing hesitation as permission, perceiving silence as compliance, and interpreting self-doubt as malleability. The Machiavellian response is calculated detachment paired with precision action. Fear, once recognized, must be harnessed, distilled into clarity of perception. Obsession need not be destructive. It can become the lens through which one maps the architecture of disrespect, predicting behavior, anticipating escalation, and designing interventions that recalibrate authority. The individual who wields obsession strategically converts internal turbulence into a tool of dominance, turning the predator's probing into predictable movements, foreseeing patterns that the unaware cannot see. Symbolically, this stage is a furnace. Heat is applied to the ego, pressure to the identity, forcing internal restructuring. Those who endure emerge tempered, their perception sharpened, their control over self and environment intensified. Silence, absence, and selective confrontation are now instruments of power rather than reactions to threat. By transforming fear into strategic insight, the mind gains the capacity to absorb disrespect, measure its impact, and convert it into an advantage that others cannot comprehend until it is too late. At this juncture, obsession ceases to be a liability and becomes a strategic asset. The mind that endures this stage begins to anticipate, manipulate, and dominate perception itself. Fear is no longer a shackle, it is a compass guiding decisive action, a mechanism for the reclamation of power and a rehearsal for absolute psychological authority. Disrespect, once internalized and analyzed, begins to challenge the very structure of identity. The mind experiences a subtle dissonance. The self it has known no longer aligns with the external signals it receives. Confidence wavers, habitual patterns of behavior feel insufficient, and every interaction becomes a test of authenticity versus perception. This fracture is not visible to others. It is an internal battlefield where the mind negotiates its boundaries, its values, and the degree to which it will allow itself to be diminished. At this stage, the individual confronts a stark truth: respect is not inherited, it is enforced. The erosion of identity is a diagnostic tool, revealing areas of vulnerability that others seek to exploit. Those who recognize this fracture can act deliberately, recalibrating the balance of power by asserting boundaries with precision. Every measured response, an absence where expectation demands presence, a refusal where permission was assumed, reshapes perception. Respect is no longer a given, it becomes a consequence of interaction, carefully engineered and strategically reinforced. The Machiavellian observer understands that identity, fractured or challenged, can be reconstructed stronger and sharper. The cracks formed by repeated disrespect are not weaknesses but vectors of transformation. By embracing the fracture, the mind gains insight into human behavior anticipating manipulation and neutralizing its effects before they manifest externally. The process is quiet, unseen, yet profoundly effective. Those who attempt to test limits will find the very foundation of authority reorganized, reinforced, and inescapable. Psychologically, this stage is a transition from reactive defense to proactive control. Ego, once threatened, is rebuilt as a resilient instrument of perception. Authority is no longer asserted through volume or aggression, but through the subtle, immutable power of presence. The fractured identity becomes a tool for dominance, a mirror reflecting calculated strength back to those who sought to diminish it, leaving them exposed and uncertain. The fracture of identity, once mastered, signals a pivotal shift. Respect is no longer assumed, fear is no longer reactive, and the architecture of influence is deliberately fortified. The mind that navigates this stage emerges not merely unshaken, but architecturally superior, prepared to confront subsequent disrespect with measured precision and unyielding control. By now, the mind has endured subtle assaults, internalized fear, and weathered the fracture of identity. What remains is the deliberate consolidation of authority, the transformation of chaos into controlled dominance. Disrespect, once a tool of erosion, now becomes a measuring stick, revealing who respects limits and who is willing to exploit leniency. The strategist does not react impulsively. Every observation is a calculation, every response a precise vector of influence. At this stage, control extends beyond self, restoration to the manipulation of perception in others. Silence is employed as a weapon, absence as a statement, and selective engagement as a calibration of power. Those who challenge boundaries are allowed only within controlled parameters, their behavior guided by the architecture of dominance the mind has reconstructed. The previously fracturing ego is now fortified, unassailable yet adaptive, capable of projecting authority without the need for aggression or justification. The Machiavellian principle is clear. Power lies not in reaction, but in preemption. Each disrespectful behavior is anticipated, each potential challenge neutralized before it manifests fully. Presence becomes a psychological force. The world perceives unwavering command, while the mind moves with deliberate subtlety, orchestrating outcomes from behind the veil of calm. Control is no longer reactive, it is preemptive, structural, and unyielding. Emotion is contained, and influence is measured. Those who attempt to provoke are guided into patterns that reinforce your authority rather than diminish it. Absence communicates as loudly as presence, silence weighs heavier than confrontation. Every tolerated slight, once a vulnerability, disrespect no longer threatens the psyche, it informs strategy. The mind has absorbed, analyzed, and reconstructed every intrusion into a framework of unshakable dominance. Authority is not demanded, it is perceived. Influence is not enforced, it is assumed. The consolidation of power is quiet, precise, and absolute, a testament to the mastery of self and the inevitability of calculated control. The final stage is not about them, it is about you. Every slight endured, every boundary enforced, every calculated silence has served a purpose beyond reaction. The mind now occupies a dominion untouched by the whims of others. The human desire to diminish, to manipulate, to provoke is a constant in the landscape of interaction. Those who once tested limits will now confront the unassailable truth. Influence resides not in their actions, but in your perception of them. Their disrespect, their attempts at erosion, have become instruments in the quiet construction of your absolute authority. At this stage, the psyche has transcended the need for external validation. Obsession has been reframed into insight, fear into strategy, ego fracture into structural resilience. What remains is a presence so measured, so controlled, that the world perceives dominance without aggression. Respect is no longer negotiated, it is inevitable. Influence is no longer borrowed, it is inherent. The human mind, when stripped to its core, reveals a terrifying simplicity. It obeys only the architecture of perceived power. Those who challenged you now exist within the perimeter you have drawn, moving according to patterns you have subtly designed. The haunting truth is this: morality, courtesy, or fairness are irrelevant in the calculus of control. The human heart is malleable, the human mind is impressionable. Silence, absence, precision, and unwavering presence are far more persuasive than anger, persuasion, or indulgence. To master these forces is to wield authority without conflict, to enforce boundaries without visible effort, and to assert dominance without external confrontation. Those who sought to destabilize you will recognize, often too late, the quiet inevitability of your power. This stage marks the final conquest, not of others, but of self. Emotional turbulence is replaced by strategic equilibrium. The mind commands without struggle, influences without force, and exists as a quiet, immutable center in a world of shifting wills. The lesson is unflinching human behavior bends to perception, and perception bends to control. Power, once internalized, radiates outward. Influence, once mastered, becomes an unassailable constant. In the end, mastery is not declared, it is recognized. Authority does not seek validation. It asserts itself in silence, and those who trespass against it, who attempt to diminish it, find themselves mapped, anticipated, and contained within the architecture of a mind that tolerates nothing yet fears nothing. This is the essence of true power, not the destruction of others, but the unshakable dominion over one's own presence, and the quiet inevitability of being both feared and understood.